In the scorching upper reaches of the Sun's atmosphere, the corona, scientists have just seen a new type of magnetic explosion. The explosion, known as forced or controlled magnetic reconnection, is triggered by an eruption on the Sun, which causes tangled magnetic field lines to explosively snap and realign, shooting out particles and energy. The discovery may help scientists understand a key mystery about how the corona, the Sun's outermost layer, is millions of degrees hotter than layers below it. Previously, scientists had only seen spontaneous reconnection, which is not necessarily linked to an eruption or external forcing on the Sun. The forced reconnection event was clearly visible when the scientists used observations from NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory to look at a wavelength of light showing plasma heated to 6 million degrees. The data showed a prominence, a large loop of plasma moving up from the visible surface of the Sun, the photosphere. In a series of images taken over an hour, the prominence could be seen falling back into the photosphere. En route, the prominence ran into a snarl of magnetic field lines, causing them to reconnect in a distinct X shape. The data from the event showed that the prominence, which was fairly cool relative to the blistering corona, gained heat from the event. The temperature of the reconnection point was also elevated. This suggests that forced reconnection might be one way the corona is heated locally. The scientists are continuing to look for more forced reconnection events. With more observations, they can begin to understand the mechanics behind the reconnection and how often it might happen.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Scott Roberts from Explore Scientific and the Explore Alliance. And today with us is Tyler Bowman and Gary Palmer. Gary is our special guest of this particular show. And of course, the focus is going to be on solar imaging. So I hope you enjoy it and learn some new tips, including some processing tips and how to even polar align using the sun. So I'll let you take it away, Tyler.
Hey guys, fellow astronomers, fellow astrophotographers, we got a very special guest, Gary Palmer. I've known Gary. Gary, how long have I known you? A couple of years now?
Yeah, a couple of years. Must be something like that.
He's the most down-to-earth astrophotographer that I've ever met. He likes to bust your chops every once in a while, but that's just his personality. And that's why we get along so well, because we banter back and forth and we've always bounced ideas off our heads. But I mainly want to talk to him about solar imaging. In my opinion, Gary is a world-renowned solar imager. I love his solar imaging, and it's just amazing on what he can do, and he just makes it look simple. Of course, he's been doing it for a while, but he literally makes everything look simple. And I'm hoping everybody can gather or get some type of help that they're struggling with either using quarks, telescopes, camera equipment on what to actually get or what you're looking at getting. I'm hoping that with this episode that Gary can kind of enlighten you to help ease the burden of solar imaging, because it can be hard. I've struggled with it for a long time, but Gary's walked me through the steps that I need to get everything that I need. I've only got one solar imagery. I mean, I do deep sky stuff and I just test stuff. That's all I do. I know I'm terrible. I'm not a true astrophotographer, I know. But I'm going to turn it over to Gary, where he's going to talk about some safety and how to polar align on the sun and what he does on a day-to-day basis and what he can recommend for our audience, either getting started to the intermediate to the advanced. So Gary, take it away.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for the kind words and so on. So at the real beginning, I know you hear it everywhere, but we're always on about the safety when imaging the sun. I've set fire to so many things over the years, it's unreal. I know what I'm doing. Yeah, but I can tell you now, if you get the end of a telescope and it points at a floor with no solar filter on it, it will set fire to the floor if it's wood. Yeah, it will burn you, it will burn your eyes, it will burn any other equipment. So the safety side is really quite important with this. And this also goes for leaving telescopes, if telescopes are set up at events and they're set up for solar projection or something, is not to leave them. Yeah, if we've got children running around at these sort of events, you know, the child just looks at it as a telescope. And if somebody leaves it pointing at the sun with just an eyepiece in the back of it for projection, there's all sorts of problems. Even when telescopes have got filters on, there can be issues with them. So many a time I've done different things. I can remember a few years back setting fire to the baffles inside the telescope. It was all filtered correctly. Everything was correct on it, but it turns out the baffles were plastic right down the back end of the telescope. Therefore, yeah, it reflected back up the inside off of the UVR cut filter. And all of a sudden I'm looking at it and going, that image is a bit poor. I took the solar filter off the back and all this smoke's pouring out everywhere. So it is a real point to think about what you're doing. Check filters. If you're using solar film, things like that, hold them up in the daylight, not to the sun, yeah, but just in the daylight, and check they've got no holes in them. Yeah, just a tiny little pinhole. It will burn straight through your camera's sensor, let alone your eye. Yeah, so anything like this, you've really got to double check it and check it each time. Personally, I don't use a lot of solar film these days. I prefer glass filters. There's less chance of them leaking and becoming dangerous. So normally you'll see a crack in the end of them, but it's certainly relevant with solar film. And bear in mind the heat. The heat of this is very hot, or if you're using a diagonal on the back of a telescope and you take a filter out, there's direct sunlight shining somewhere. That could be at somebody else in a crowd or in the vicinity of your telescope. So it is really important that you sort of think about some of these things. But that aside, solar is really fun. It's fun because it's a dynamic object. It's changing all the time. Every couple of minutes you look at it, something's changing. And when it gets really busy, when we get into a full solar cycle and the sun's running at maximum, you're spoilt for choice as to where you're looking on the sun. You're racing across. There's an active thing going off on one side and there's a prominence changing on the other side, and then there's another active area, producing a flare, and something else is producing a CME, and you can end up with, I think it was about 4 years ago in the September, we were having something like 26 solar flares a day, just out of one sunspot region. So now if you multiply this is what makes it fun. And it can be quite cheap. It doesn't need to be expensive. You don't need to go all singing and all dancing. I think where most people start off in this is with like solar film, what we call white light. And with white light, you're going to be imaging the sunspots, all of the detail around the sunspots and granulation. If they move on from white light, then they normally use something like one of these, which is a solar wedge. That starts to make things a little bit easier. They're all in one unit. This particular type here has got a contrasting unit on the top as well. So as you adjust it, it can brighten it or darken it. And you've got the finder on the back. And finders, you're going to notice this when you start solar imaging. The sun is a really big object, fills up a lot of the sky, but when you're trying to find it with a telescope, it can be near impossible some days. So
it really is. It's hard. It's extremely hard.
Any equipment that's got a finder on it is always handy. There are other little solar finders that you can put. I think there's one. I think that's a teleview one, but you can get these little solar finders on the top there. And that then shows you a reflection of the sun. And these little things are quite cheap now. You can pick them up, $30, something like that. And they are really handy. They're a time saver. Out of this sort of thing. But the white light's really the first point that everybody goes to. And then as soon as they've gone into white light, somebody turns around and says, well, you can't image flares and you can't image prominences and you can't image anything else. So you start looking down the list of hydrogen alpha telescopes. You've got quite a lot on the market now. Got telescopes from Lunt, Coronado, smaller telescopes, dedicated solar scopes from Daystar. And I think there's even one coming out from Skywatcher now. I've seen a prototype of one. So there's quite a lot of choice. but everybody's slightly different on what they want with solar imaging. Some people just want to see the whole of the sun. So they want to image the whole of the disk. Other people want to get in close. And once you start getting in close on the sun, then it takes a little bit more effort, is probably the easiest way of putting it. So you can start off with a dedicated scope. We use something like that one that I just had, this little 50mm. They're quite popular these days. Got a pressure tuner on the side of them, different size blocking filters. And the size that you get on the blocking filter refers to the little aperture in there. So you can just see that little bit of light there, the aperture of that. So this one says 600. You can go up 1200, 1800, right up to sort of the 32 or 3400 area, to quite large aperture blocking filters on these. They're fairly straightforward, fairly easy to use. They do start going up in cost though. That's the key thing. Yeah, once you get into hydrogen alpha, you're into some quite expensive equipment.
Well, I mean, wouldn't that also be a part of the aperture as well? The bigger the aperture,
Yeah,
obviously the more money you're going to spend.
But see, where a lot of people get confused on this at the moment, and I will run into the sort of Daystar stuff in a minute, is that most of the Daystar equipment in the Quark range certainly has got telecentric Barlows inside it. So when we're using some of this basic equipment, the dedicated solar scopes, they've got no Barlows in them. So this is how you can move up quite high in aperture and still see the whole of the sun, yeah, inside the field of view. And you need to use standard Barlows, yeah, 2.5. Something like the Power Mates generally work quite well on solar. Had some good results with those in the past. You don't want to go too cheap on the Barlows, though. Some of them do create reflections inside, and you'll get a point in the image which is a lot brighter than the rest of it, and that's actually a reflection off of the Barlow itself. So if you start to move up the range, then you can move up something like these. This is the 80mm lump. Yeah, some quite handy things. The handle on here, yeah, this has actually got a viewfinder in it. Yeah, so when you look at the back of it, you actually see the red dot in there, which is the sun. Yeah, and as you're lining it up, makes it all pretty good. A couple of little things on these, good tips. Whenever you get one of these, yeah, release the screws on it, put them down on a flat surface, and make sure that these filters, this pressure tuner settles on it. Yeah, it's not screwed on. So if we screwed this up now, we could pull this off, band very slightly, and then you're starting to get problems with the images. So always put them upright like that, screw them up together. And the other thing with any pressure tuner, yeah, is to release the pressure in it. Yeah, you should do this daily. Yeah, and that is to actually unwind it all the way. You'll hear a little hiss come out the end of it. That's it. And then wind it back up. Because depending on where you store this is dependent on what the air pressure temperature is inside the filter. So generically in the UK, we have quite variable, and quite a lot of Europe has variable temperatures. So if we get cloud come across, you'll find that the temperature might change by 3 or 4 degrees. And that's enough on one of these pressure tuners to move it off. But they work well. They're all fairly good these days. You don't get a lot of problems with them. The only thing I've ever really seen on the lumps are the seals sometimes go on the pressure tuners. You know, so it is a case of, just put that back, case of looking after them. That's the real sort of key thing at the end of the day. Think about where you're storing the scopes. I've seen damage to all sorts of filters through condensation. Yeah, and generically, lots of solar filters actually rust. Yeah, so you used to see this on a lot of the Coronados, the ITF filters used to rust. And that was because people were storing them in quite cold places. So the boxes were getting condensation in, weren't really using it over the winter, pull it out after the winter, and then you got the same sort of problem. And you can get that. Let me just take that one off. You can get the same thing on some of the lumps. The lump filter that goes, this one here is gone. I don't know whether it's going to show this in the light.
There it
Probably
is.
yeah, there.
Yeah, right there.
You just see some like dark patches at the top of it. And that's started to go. That's got condensation in there. Yeah, and it will.
You can't get it
go.
out.
And what you'll just see in the telescope is you're just going to see like this orange or red blob. Yeah, and you can't focus it. You can't do anything with it. It's not really showing any detail. So it's normally the filters. But you can buy these. There's a couple of companies out in the US that do them. Yeah, they're readily available, and you can replace them yourself. You don't need to send them off. Yeah, they're very, very easy to replace yourself.
So Gary, you keep mentioning hydrogen alpha filters, but what if a deep sky object astrophotographer, will a normal hydrogen alpha filter work to start with, or are they specific filters?
It's not got any energy rejection properties on it. So there are a couple of things in the basic design of a solar telescope. So the main thing is this part here, which is the etalon. Yeah, so this is actually quite an important part of the solar telescope. So if we just got remove this and then we put the block-in filter on the telescope, it's not actually going to produce an image. Yeah, you're not going to see anything there. And what you have to remember is that all of these components are reducing light. They're reducing the light down to an acceptable level. So if we remove parts out, or we don't have parts there, i.e. if we use that hydrogen alpha filter, we would have something missing from the imaging tray. Some people say, oh, can I use it for like a rejection? And I sort of get onto that a little bit with the Lunt telescopes, because, with the Daystar, because the Quark, when it came along, revolutionized really solar imaging and solar viewing. There's no other way to put that. Yeah, it totally changed what went on. There've been other ideas along this line, but they've not really been perfected. So the Quark, let's get this one out.
Gary, there's a question on YouTube you'd be able to answer, I would think, since you use Daystar Quarks. Astronomy Notebook wants to know, what's the average longevity of a Daystar Quark?
Right,
I'm assuming it would have. Go ahead.
That depends on what energy rejection filter you use in front of it. And this was the key thing that really sort of defined the market, because you would have to have two filters effectively. So this filter, we're going back before the Quark, you would generally use an energy rejection filter on a standard telescope. That cuts the energy down coming through. And then you would have some other form of etalon and your other solar block-in filters at the bottom end. Now, when the Quark came out, they specified that you could use these with a standard UVR cut filter. So if we look at that, box standard UVR cut filter, yeah, they work fine. And they generally work on apertures up to about 127 millimeter, maybe a touch over. Now, if you're running this in midsummer, and I think this is where a little bit of confusion comes, midsummer, it gets hot. You know, you really notice from today, yeah, I could more or less hold my hand on the back of the telescope with no filter on it, and it's just getting a bit warm. In the middle of the summer, when the sun's right up and it's beaming down, you're lucky if you've got your hand under there for, you know, a second before you start to burn. So these energy rejection filters, I think they're quite good, but if you're doing a lot of solar imaging, yeah, then really you want an ERF. Yeah, and that's the key to this. This is what's looking after the equipment, because at the end of the day, it's cutting down, it's doing what it says on the tin. It's cutting down the heat and the energy that's coming through the system. So the life of a Quark depends. I do use mine a lot, so I've kicked through a couple over the years, but I probably use mine more in 6 months than what somebody uses in 5 years. And it has a lot of applications on different equipment. So there is a rejection filter also in the end of the Quark. Yeah, and combined with the two, I still think, to be honest, you're better off with an ERF. You get a better definition, you get a better contrast in images, and you're also trying to protect the equipment. So, and that's the same really with any of your equipment, isn't it? You don't let your equipment rattle around in boxes, you know, when it's a £1,000 camera. So you're going to try and protect your Quark a little bit. But do remember, if you've got problems with them, they're warranted for 5 years.
That's a
So
plus.
if
a big plus.
you think, yeah, if you think it's going off, then I would say have a chat with Daystar and get it returned. That would be my way forward. But the Quark revolutionized things because you can use it on a standard telescope. So we can use it on anything, use it on the Explore Scientific here. Yeah, use it on any aperture as well. Yeah, so providing you look at the type of ERF that's on there or UVR cut filter, you can use it on anything. You can use it visual. Most problems come with the Quark. There's 2 complaints. One, it takes too long to heat. And I always turn around and say, anything that's good, you have to wait for. Yeah, so if it takes a little bit longer to heat, wait for it. Yeah, you're going to get the result. The other thing is lots of people forget about the 4.2 telecentric bolo in them. So they think, right, I've got a 100mm refractor, I've got a 120mm refractor that I don't use anymore. Yeah, I'm going to use that for solar. They put it onto the sun, put the Quark on it, heat it all up, and then they can't find anything. It's too powerful.
That's the struggle I have.
Way too powerful. You really, at the end of the day, if we do solar events, we would use something like a Takahashi 60mm that for visual. That would be perfect and give you really, really nice views of the sun. If you're imaging, yes, by all means, but when you're first using them, you want it on something a bit smaller to get used to it. Yeah, so maybe move it over to the limb, try focusing on the edge of the limb, and then sort of progressing from there. But there are a few things with it that are unique, is probably the easiest way of putting it. Since the Quarks sort of come along, other things have progressed. So we need things like the interference eliminator or tilt adapter. Now, I've seen quite a few different variations on these. Don't have to go for the Daystar one. You can go for one of the others. We'll remember the name of it in a minute. But some of these are based on, that I've seen, are based on the Deep Sky tilt adapters, the old-fashioned ones that had the 3 screws on it. Yeah. And the problem is that when you do that, you have to loosen the screws off to get the plate to tilt. And when you do that, as soon as you do that, you've got light going in this gap here. Yeah, any light going in is going to affect your image, so it's a waste of time. Yeah, the only way you can get around that is a bit of PVC tape around the outside of it. Yeah, and it turns into a bit of a homebrew sort of thing then, and quite awkward. These are angled, yeah, perfectly, so they slide across when they're tilting. The tilt is needed if you're imaging the sun. You're going to get a thing called Newton's rings, and they don't always look like rings. They can look like wavy lines coming down the screen. Basically, what's happening now is the light's coming out the end of the Quark. It's going along to a camera, yeah, and as it hits that front shiny surface of the sensor there, yeah, it creates a reflection that comes back to the Quark. So now you're getting 2 signals reflected back, and the camera is picking up a second signal. By tilting this very, very slightly, then we stop that problem. Yeah, so, and this is quite a common problem with lots of different hydrogen alpha filters or hydrogen alpha telescopes. It's been a problem all the way along. Before the days of tilt adapters, we just used to get the cameras and we used to get a little bit of PVC tape, and they would just be very slightly slotted in the top of an eyepiece holder like that, so that they had a bit of tilt on them, and we would tape them just to stop them falling out. But that was the old-fashioned way. Now things have progressed quite a lot, so we can get some really nice images. But the main thing is to remember that these are really, really powerful. Yeah, they're not in a dangerous way, in a really good way. It's just that they take some time to get used to. Yeah. The echelons on these are just electronic. Yeah, so now people turn around and say, what's the best place for it? Each one of these is generally a little bit different, so I can't answer that. This is a trial and error thing. Yeah, you try it off, you might find that you get really good detail at the center of the wing shift at the top, might be a little bit off in the red or a little bit off in the blue. And that again will depend on your optics, it would depend on the cameras you're using. and so on. So the quark has sort of progressed along a little way. Now we've now got sodium quarks, we've got calcium quarks. So these will need bowlowing up. They're not used generally. You're going to get more a full disc on this because it's not got the Barlow in it. So you, using 2 times Barlow, something like that, is going to bring it up quite well. But calcium does suffer. Calcium suffers with our atmosphere. Yeah, so being right down in the blue, it's the one susceptible to any poor seeing conditions, things like that. So to get high resolution calcium does take a bit of time. You know, I always say real good high resolution calcium is probably once every few years, something like that. You've got magnesium available now. Yeah, that's quite good. And aperture wise, you can go to whatever you want. You know, there's all sorts of toys on the market now to fit every single budget. I mean, we've got that's an 8-inch edge that's converted just for solar. Yeah, so it's a full solar system, and you don't need any protection on that. You'll see it's got the coating already on the front. Not cheap, but these things are around. So if you live somewhere that you've got good seeing conditions, then you could use something like this, maybe with one of the smaller quarks. Yeah, one of the combo quarks, and that will give you quite nice imaging. You can go the other end of the scale. You move up to this sort of thing. So these are 0.2. Let's put it up that way. Whether that will focus on that. But that's a 0.2 Armstrong. So that's moving down now to look at the outer structures of the sun. So to look at things like filaments, active areas, they really shine through quite well on that sort of thing. And your prominences are not really 2D, they're more 3-dimensional when you're looking at them through that. But these sorts of things cost lots of money. You know, they are not cheap. You start moving up into $30,000, something like that. There's lots of other toys. New toy that's turned up is this system. Now this is
insane.
This is a filter wheel for the quarks. So it literally, it's the prototype it turned up today. You'll see it's got the 4 quarks, got the red one, hydrogen alpha, calcium, sodium, and then the green one, which is magnesium. Camera goes on the top here. Yeah, and then this goes into the back of a diagonal on the back of your telescope, or can go direct in the bag. Yeah, and it's powered, so it's got heater power. Yeah, so it heats all of the quarks, all ready to go. And what that will do is allow you to combine images of different data. So you'll be able to maybe image in sodium and combine it with hydrogen alpha, or you'll be able to combine it with magnesium. And the reason you can do that is because no aspect is changing. Your camera's staying in the same position. Yeah. So you'll be able to image sunspots in all of your wavelengths in one go. So technology is moving on quite a lot with this. People quite often ask on the mount, what sort of mount? If you're going to be imaging the sun for quite a while, then the tracking mount is really the way forward. And some of the smaller mounts, while they're very, very good, I mean, the Exos 100 is pretty good for solar, not had any issues with it. But if you start to go any smaller than that, you have to think of the weight issues. So there can be weight issues depending on the type of equipment you're using. But Skywatcher's little Solar Quest is quite a good little mount. If you've just got a 50mm solar scope, that thing actually tracks the sun for you. So you just literally put it on the floor, spins itself around, locks onto the sun, and just stays there. That would be good for full disk imaging. If we're starting to do some of the high resolution imaging, then we really want to look at more mounts that we would use on deep sky. And that's because the weight can mount up a little bit on this stuff. If we're imaging, we don't want too much jolting around in the system. We want it to be quite smooth. And I always say in solar, once you've been doing it a little while, you probably get aperture fever. Yeah, so the size of the telescope is going to go up. Yeah, and you know, good, nice, clear days. Everybody loves to get something like 120 mil or 152 out.
Yeah.
Get that to the sun.
Let's move on a little bit. You could talk for days on telescopes and quarks, but what about the camera? What about,
Right.
you know, what's a decent camera to get started with?
This again depends on location, seeing conditions. Probably one of the most popular cameras is the 174, IMX 174. That's been a good all-round camera for solar for quite a long time. The only thing is on the pixel size, and you do end up looking a bit zoomed out on it. But there are things you can do in your processing that can counteract that. So it's not the end of the world. You've got other cameras like the one that I had screwed on the top here. This is based on the 178, IMX 178. So let me just get that off. So that there, you've got one of the Player One cameras. Now, these are sort of fairly new on the market. A lot of people tell me, so, you know what they like. They're pretty good, to be honest. And they're pretty good because they've got RAM on board. And RAM speeds things up. Doesn't matter what you're doing. Yeah, a little bit of extra RAM somewhere along the line speeds things up. So that really helps out on your download times. And if you've got direct SSDs on the board, yeah, so you've got one of the M2 systems, you can really throw the frames down the line off of these cameras. So something like the 174, that's going to be anywhere up around 130 frames a second. The Player One 178, that's actually sits there at 60 frames a second in full frame mode, which is pretty fast for one of those cameras. But we have to look at sizing as well, you know, of the video files. Now, when we record this, we generally use mono cameras, never use color cameras on the sun. You can use color cameras on white light and maybe on, you know, a little bit of calcium or whatever, but they are gonna, they're gonna be lacking detail. And the reason is for that is the color matrix that goes over the front of the camera. So if you think of the matrix, it's generally got two greens, a red and a blue. So if we looked at a generic camera, it might be RGGB on its matrix. So if we're imaging in hydrogen alpha, that's in red. And in red, we're only using 1 pixel out of the 4 pixels that are available working right the way across the sensor. So if we work that out, that's only a quarter of the sensor we're using if we use a color camera. If we use a mono camera, yeah, we're using all of the pixels, yeah, on the sensor. That means it gives you a lot higher resolution image. And it also means that most images are false colored on the sun.
So there's
nearly all of them are recorded as a video. We use SER, yeah, as a video format. And also you can use software like SharpCap, Fire Capture, and we can start doing things like subtracting flats. So one thing you'll start to learn with solar imaging, if you're doing it a lot, is it's actually very dusty. So we've got the opposite to night imaging. Night imaging, it's always damp and you've always got the problems with dew and all of those sorts of things. In the daytime, the biggest problem is actually keeping the dust off the equipment. So you end up with dust spots in the images, no matter how hard you try and clean all the equipment. Subtracting live flats makes it really, really easy. All we do, we set the system up, defocus the system, or we use something like this, one of these flats caps. Yeah, oh, let's put it around like that. So you can see these are flats cap. You put that on the solar telescope, defocus it, and then or it defocuses the image for you. And then we increase the exposure, bring the exposure up to around 50, 60 on the histogram, and then subtract. And it will subtract all of the dust and any other issues that are going on straight out of the live video. They're pretty cheap. You can actually use these on nighttime astronomy as well, just so you know. So in the daytime, you can put one of these on your deep sky telescope and it will diffuse the light right across. One of the good things about this, it's always been awkward to subtract flats for full disk images because you've got the dark area around the outside. It diffuses right the way across. So you can subtract out flats for a full disk image and that also balances up the filters. Some filters you can run can be a little bit off, what we call slightly off band, or the tuners sort of as it moves across, because of your field of view, it's brighter on one side of the sun than what it is on the other side of the sun. So that's easy to correct with something like that, quite a cheap cost.
Yeah, there's a couple questions.
Yep.
Astronomy Notebook wants to know if the bigger the field of view of your camera telescope, is there more problems with Newtonian rings?
Not necessarily. It's just down to the actual reflective coatings normally on the camera.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to name brands, but there are cameras that do have issues on solar. When you put them on there, they seem to have more reflections than another model in their range. Do you know what I mean? So you can find this. And also the pixel sizing changes. So you have to remember with some of the more modern cameras, like the 178, the 183, they look like they've got a mesh over the actual image. So, and you see this on deep sky images, they look like they've got a mesh sitting there. It almost looks like a biomatrix is sitting over the image. And it's natural from the sensor, but you can remove this by subtracting the flats. Yeah, so the subtracting live flats won't remove Newton's rings. It will help, but it won't remove them. Yeah, they're a slightly different kettle of fish, and the only way to remove them is by tilting the camera.
Okay, well, good. Well,
the only other thing was the sort of polar alignment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if your mount has got the ability to align on the sun, so quite a few mounts on the market have. Let's just pick one, an easy one, something like a Celestron AVX, quite a popular mount. You can actually go into the menu, and hidden away in there is the sun. Yeah, and you can tell it to open up the sun into the menu, and then you can align the telescope onto the sun. Most important thing is make sure the mount's flat. Yeah, so flat level, no different to your deep sky imaging. Yeah, make sure it's level on the tripod. Nice and flat, and then dial in your elevation, and also look at it being roughly north. Yeah, when you're setting it up for us in the northern hemisphere. Bear in mind that if you use a compass, if you get it near anything metal, yeah, it moves the compass. Yeah, so where your compass is saying north. So if you're going to use a compass, stick it on the floor about 5 or 6 feet away from the mount. Yeah, the mount's all metal. Also bear in mind that true north is 5 degrees off of magnetic north when you're using a compass. Yeah, so do bear in mind that it will be off to what it's actually showing. Once you see where that is, if it's got solar system aligned in the menu, it's really easy, because you just tell it to go to the sun and then adjust your elevation, yeah, and so on, until the sun comes into the field of view in the telescope, and that's it. It's polar aligned. If it's not, in general, so say like the Skywatcher here, that one we would just set it up as close to north as possible and as close to our elevation as possible, and you'll probably find that a track for a good 2 or 3 hours. If you find that it starts to drift off really quickly, just adjust the adjuster very, very finely in one direction and see whether it still drifts more in that direction, or just bring it back a little bit. You can do that watching it live on the screen, on the camera.
Nice.
And adjust it out, but it is fairly straightforward.
So we had some other topics you were wanting to process, or at least because you took some imaging of the sun today.
Yeah.
So let's run through just a quick dusting of processing as well. I can share my screen real quick, because I was wanting to show everybody that with our new Skies Up magazine that we just have issued. Scott, when did we issue this? This week? On our Skies Up magazine?
It's been out a couple of weeks. Yeah.
So it's been the newest issue of Skies Up actually has a imaging the sun, and it kind of gives you a little breakdown of what Gary has talked about today: the hydrogen alpha, the white filters, the calcium, and it gives you a little bit more of the scientific approach of what these particular filters can do, and it'll also talk about how to process it. And that's the beauty part. And Gary's going to go over a little bit about this, but his version that he gets the most results on, and it's literally amazing. So if you haven't got our new Skies Up edition, you can go to the Explore Scientific webpage, and it's literally under the Explore Alliance. and you can darn screen. It's right there under the events and experiences, and you can download the latest and greatest edition, or you can see the past editions as well, just to get the information that you need so you can become a better solar imager. But that's all I had, so I'm going to go back to Gary. Really,
yeah, that would be a pretty good article. It's written by Pedro Ray, and I know him. Yeah, he's very, very good. Been doing solar for a long, long time. He's curator to one of the universities out in Europe. So yeah, it's certainly worth a read through on that. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to move a couple of screens around. I'm just going to put you over there and then bring these screens back over, just that I've got everything where I want it. So we'll start off. Now, today wasn't clear, yeah, not by any means. So a little bit wobbly in the sky. What I'll do is share the screen. Let's just move that up a touch. Share the screen over for you. It should be on this screen here. So I've already lined one up in here and just run through to see what it's going on. So we've got two. This one's more or less more a Philly prom. So it's part on the surface, part out into space on the edge of the limb. This one's actually we class as a filament, basically, because it's on the surface. So they are technically the same thing. It's their position on the sun, and that dictates their name. So, as I said, we record these. Let me just look up the name. 15. Give me a second. Just find that one. There we are. That one there.
Now, so guys, if you don't know, Gary also has courses on our website, and he can walk you through this step by step individually as well. But we'll touch more on that here in a minute.
But we record these in what we call an SER format. The reason for the SER format is that if we record in AVI, Windows has a shutoff. Now, they say about 3.5 gig. But I've found that anything up around 3 gig and over is generally where it starts playing around. And that can either be in recognizing the file, processing it, transferring it to another hard drive or something like that. The SER has no limit on it. So some of these files that we do now, they're 20 gigabyte files. They're seriously large, these, even though they're not that long. So if we're looking at this, you can see the seeing conditions there, probably a little bit close in on the sun, but no pain, no gain. Yeah, you've got to sort of get on with this sometimes and sort of work from there. So if I now stop that for a second and we bring auto stack it up. Now, lots of people that get into planetary processing and solar and lunar processing will have all heard of Registax. Registax has been around almost as long as telescopes these days. It's been around, well over a decade, but it's not been updated. Has stopped doing anything on it quite a while back. So it's very, very slow. And if you're using these large video files, then you need a lot faster processor and program. So we use AutoStacker. Now, here in the UK, when I've got seeing conditions like this, where it's jumping around, I generally use the older version. It just works a lot nicer for me. It doesn't latch on to the poor seeing or any high cloud running through. So all we do with the video file is literally drag and drop it in. That's it. Once it's dragged and dropped in, then what we've got to do is run through this and just sort of set this panel up. And it's fairly straightforward. At the bottom there, you can see it's 1,000 frames. We want to put it into surface mode. If we put it into planetary mode, you'll notice there's all red lines around it. It's in the wrong mode to process this type of image.
Gary, so can you enlarge it just a little bit?
That is about as large as you're going to get on there.
Okay.
Yeah. That's using the full screen on here. And you just need to keep it over a little bit. Otherwise, these two panels will play with each other.
I appreciate it.
We need to have it, in surface mode. I generally tick the improved tracking and the expand box. The expand box is ticked so that it's getting processing as much of the image as possible when we're doing this. The noise robust, somewhere between 4 and 6 for higher resolution solar. If you're going down into full disk solar, then I would play around with this. I might go up to 7 or 8, something like that. This seems to work quite well from here. And then for our alignment points, I would click on global. Once we've sort of set that box up there on that side on the left-hand column, move over to the right-hand column. The amount of frames, somewhere around a quarter, yeah, normally works well. The more frames you put in, the worse it can get. And the worse the seeing conditions are, the less frames you need, yeah, to stack. So each camera will be slightly different. But for this one, we're going to use the quarter, 250 frames. We don't sharpen anything in this. We sharpen this in Registacks afterwards. So we still use Registacks, or we can use PixInsight or another program that runs some form of wavelet sharpening quite easily. If you want it to open in Registacks, click the More File options, tick the checkbox in there, and just make sure that Registacks is running in the background here. If it's not running, then it's not going to send it anywhere. The top bar in video window, what we need to do, if I use the control key and the left click on the mouse, I can move the alignment box around, can change the size on this and do other things. This is going to work quite well on this video here. And then what we do is the slider at the top. I'm just going to move it to the right. Once you started moving it, you can use your mouse wheel. We just want to find one of the frames that's slightly clearer. So something like that one there, maybe. We'll just have a look at a couple more. So we're running through just to try and pick out, yeah, a slightly nicer frame. That's going to be the reference frame. So just run through that one there will do. And then we're going to analyze. So back to the other control panel, analyze the image.
While we wait for that, Gary, there's a question from Pekka Hatula. He says, where should I start the tuning pressure vent on my Lunt 50? From the hole as in screwed in, or from the beginning?
Most of the Lunts I find screwing quite a long way, before they start. But what you're actually doing is you're looking for the contrast and the detail coming out. If there's not a lot of detail coming out, and the easiest way is maybe go to the limb, and start looking for the spicules or a prominence on the edge. Once you start to find that prominence comes into view, then you'll be able to, or you'll know the tuner's not far off. It's certainly within range then. Once this is done, we need to look at placing some alignment points over this. For this size of image and this particular camera, I use 104. Place APs on the grid. We've already set it up with that amount in there to stack, so we can just hit the stack button and away it goes. So yeah, we can, the pressure tuners do vary, and it's also going to vary with your air temperature. So if that's Pekka, as in Pekka in Sweden, his air temperature is going to be quite cold. Yeah, he would have a lot different position to maybe somebody in Arizona. Okay, once that's done, we can go over to Registacks, open it up full screen. That's the image come in. And then what I normally do is click show full image. And we have our wavelets on this side. So I'm just going to run these back, reset them. If you're on a full disk shot, the initial layer wants to be about 1. If you're starting to zoom in on the image, you're using higher aperture, then you want an initial layer of 2, maybe 3. I've gone right up to 4 or 5 in the past. Under the noise system, layer 1 gives you the most noise. So if we just brought layer 1 right across, give me a second, you'll notice it's there. But if we now go back to here, you'll notice that while it's bringing stuff through, you notice how over the top of it is a lot of noise. And we don't want noise. All I've got to do then is find another program to remove the noise. So we generally don't use layer 1. You can use layer 1 to trap noise and do other things. That's a little bit more advanced. But under this process, we're just going to use layer 2. Now bring it across to about 30 to start with, somewhere around there. Click do all, and then go back to show full image. So you can see the whole thing coming out.
You make that way too easy.
And then if we open up the histogram box, I just need to move it across from this screen. Because we're trying to be sneaky here. In general, you would use a brighter exposure to image the prominence and a lower exposure to image the surface. Using the systems that I'm using, we're trying to image both at the same time. Just saves me a lot of work. Yeah, that's the main reason. So we do need to brighten it a little bit. So if we just brighten it up a little touch more, come back a bit. If you double tap on the screen where you're interested in it, and move a preview box over it. And then what we're trying to do is just brighten it enough to show up some of the fainter stuff in the structures. Then in somewhere like Photoshop or whatever, we can get that back. Okay, save the image off. And then if we just nip into the folder here. So we've got a couple here. I'll just show these as we're going through. These were from today. Yeah, there were a couple that I processed up. They're not colored yet or anything, but you can see the same thing. Again, these structures are three-dimensional. A lot of people think that they're two-dimensional, and that's just because a standard solar scope shows them two-dimensional to you. Yeah, when you're imaging. But if we run across a couple of these, you can see the sunspot there today, some nice filaments around it and some small prominences out the back there. And then we move on to this one, a little bit closer there, and the one that we just processed. Let's just go back to one of the others there, something like that one. Okay, so we're going to open that in Photoshop. Do this real quick. First thing is any stack lines, crop them off the edge of the image. They're no good to anybody. All they do is mess up the image. Crop that off. And then you can either color this straight out as it is, but I generally find that you're going to get issues out here somewhere with coloring. So what I quite often do is actually separate these. So I just use the marker tool to come down here. We're going to rush it a little bit, but I would take a little bit of time on this, try and get it as close to the edge as possible. This would be a lot neater than this normally. So we just run that around, join it up, copy it, paste it. Now we've got two halves of a document. Yeah, two halves of an image. And that means we can, so if I actually expand this up a little bit, now we can start playing around. So I could invert the surface if I want. If I want this one to stand out more, yeah, I could go into shadows and highlights first, just balance the limb there. You see how it suddenly brightens the limb? That's because as we go to invert it, it's going to change. So now if we go inverse, there you go. You can start playing around with this. You see that one standing out there, we would darken it up a little bit. You might go, no, I don't like that. I'm a purist. I like it original. Yeah, but the surface here is a little bit bright. So we might go into our levels, yeah, and just tone it down a little fraction. Just give it a little bit more. But see, what you're doing is you're still leaving the brightness on this prominence here by separating them. And that's your key. If I wanted to color the image, move it into grayscale. Don't flatten the image, leave it as two separate parts. Yeah. Then we want to go into 8-bit. And then we want to go to duotone. Now, duotone you can set up in whatever colors you want. Yeah. True hydrogen alpha is pink. It's not really red. Yeah, it's right in the sort of pinky area. When you do a pink sun, everybody goes, oh, that looks horrible. They imagine the sun yellow, any other color, yeah, apart from pink. But I normally have a little bit of pink in there as a red. Once we've got the colors set under duotone, you can go back, go to mode, switch it to RGB color, still keep it separate. And then you can start playing around with something like color balance. Yeah, we can start bringing out the reds and the yellows. Turn it a little bit orange if you want. You're the artist at this point. It's down to you as to what way you do this. And then we would select the other layer, yeah, for that prominence out there and bring that in. So click the wrong one then. Go. So same thing on this, bring some reds and yellows in. Last one, highlights will brighten that right up out there as you hit the yellow. And you can play around with this and get the right shading as to whatever you want. Yeah. Personally, I'll probably just brighten this up a little bit. But as you'll notice, as soon as you put color on things, it detracts from the detail that's there. So it is a choice on this as to what way you sort of go around it and what way you deal with these things and sort of work from there. If you wanted to leave it like this, and you just wanted to do a little bit of work with it, probably go down to that point where it was grayscale there. That's just darkened it back off a little bit. So we flatten the image off. And then we can just use a little bit of a despeckle that removes any noise, and then just do an unsharp mask. And then you can play around in here. But again, it's not raising it up too much that you get too much noise in there. Yeah. It's different for each single image. Every single image which is coming in off of the system is very, very different.
I'm impressed, Gary. I know the audience is impressed too. Folks, also don't forget that Explore Scientific is also doing a solar system astrophotography contest. Let me share my screen real quick, and we're going to literally wrap it up. And that's all it's going to be for the day of solar imaging with Gary Palmer. I mean, you just can't get any better than this. But we have a solar system astrophotography contest for anybody that wants to put solar system astrophotography. We have prizes. First winner receives a $100 Explore Scientific gift card, upgrade to their EA membership if it's applicable, and an actual mounted print 18 by 24. Second place is $75 gift card, another 18 by 24 print. Third place is $50 gift card and another 18 by 24 print. We also have a never before seen. So if you've never entered our contest and we notice that, we're going to make sure that you get noticed in our contest. And one more thing, Gary also offers mentor astrophotography courses. So if you're having any issues with deep sky or solar imaging, right here, this is the best way to do it. It really is. It's affordable, and he will not give up his time, but he will help you in the right direction to get you pointed in the right way so that you can get those beautiful details that he just showed you in the video. Other than that, Scott, do you have any closing statements for today's show?
Well, I just love having Gary on. He's participated in lots of our global star parties, and in fact, he's going to be one of the official hosts of the next global star party, which happens Tuesday night. We're going to start it earlier than we normally do. Global Star Party normally starts about 7 p.m. Central. We're going to move that all the way back to 4 p.m. Central so that he and a group of European astronomers can get online and show us what they got in a reasonable time frame for them. So actually, they'll be starting at about 10 p.m. Their time in Europe, so in the UK. Aside from that, lots of things are coming up. We are planning for in-person astronomy events. We're putting together the last pieces of the Arizona Dark Sky Star Party, which will happen next September, 2022, at the very first International Dark Sky Association's Dark Sky Park in Arizona, And so that will be at Oracle State Park. It's a 4,000-acre state park, and they are really welcoming us with open arms, which is always nice. And they want to have this star party as just one of their keynote or cornerstone events. I'm hoping so. The talks are very good right now, and so we have already put down a deposit for the site. And if you can get out, you want to, Gary, Mr. Palmer, if you want to be out there for that, let us know, and we'll see what we can do about getting you out to the star party. I think it'd be very cool to have you there. So until that time, I think that's it. We
Yep.
Coming up at the next hour at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern, is the Astronomical League Live number 10 event. And this is celebrating kind of the, what is it called? It is called the quarter center, something like that. It has to do with the equinoxes, and it was something I was just learning about today. But that is tied to Halloween. Halloween is actually an astronomical event. So it's not like we were trying to fabricate some sort of connection, but it actually really is. And so you'll want to watch the program coming up here in just about an hour. So until that time, keep looking up, and we will see you. Anything else you guys like to close up with?
Thanks to everybody for watching.
Yeah, thanks for all the audience for watching.
Gary,
Really
thanks very
appreciate
much,
it.
man. And we'll
No
talk to you
problem.
later. All right, that's great.
Hi everyone, this is Terry Mann, and I'm the Secretary of the Astronomical League and the co-host of Astronomical League Live. We have a special event coming up on October 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We're going to have a kind of Halloween party online. We have quite a few speakers. The first one is one of our regulars, one of our favorites, David Levy, and he will be doing celestial incantations. Next up, we'll have Mary Stewart Adams, passing between the worlds under October skies. We've also got Astro Bob, black holes where matter goes to die, and Molly Wakeling, spooky nebula of the night, and John Goss, the master of lunacy. And we do expect that name to stick. Barbara Harris, Algol, the Demon Star. Myself, Aurora, Soul of the Night. And we've got Carol Orge, the president of the Astronomical League. We're going to put a wizard hat on him and let him work his magic. So please let me personally invite you to join us October 15th, 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, right here. We hope to see you.
Why do we chase this thing? Jumping from one continent to the next, just to bathe for a moment in the absence of light? Who are we? What are we searching for?
T.S. Eliot wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time."
One of the qualities of seeing an eclipse is it makes you understand that every given thing is in a particular patterned relation with every other thing.
It gives me a sense of scale, gives me a sense of where I fit into the universe.
It is art, it's poetry, it's this kind of experience of going and seeing totality in which what feels merely metaphorical is suddenly experiential encounter.
Immediately afterwards, you have that overwhelming desire to see another one. That's the moment an eclipse chaser is born.
These are folks who are running all over the world for this event that lasts all of 2 or 3 minutes. Who are these people?
It's unique each time, and therefore that freshness, even if we've seen it over and over again, oh my gosh, it has the potential to re-inspire us.
A total eclipse of the sun doesn't just unfold in the heavens. It transforms the minds and hearts of those who experience it firsthand. The same is true of journeys to the most remote regions of our planet. Whether we're standing on a mountain peak or in a stark polar landscape, we can't help but reflect on our place within the larger scheme of things.